Hello, everyone, and welcome to Expansion of Indian Art Part 2, Part B. All right, so we've talked about Borobudur in Part 1. We talked about Angkor Wat in Part 2A. And now we are in basically everywhere else. So we're going to be continuing on from there. So we talked about this with Borobudur Temple. We looked at the spread of Buddhism into Indonesia, specifically Java. Then with Angkor Wat, we looked at the spread of Hinduism and Buddhism into the Angkor Wat Temple and then the Bayon Temple, which are all part of the Angkor Thom complex. And now we're going to look at Thailand, all right, which is going to be nearby. So Thailand is also going to adopt Buddhism from India. And one of the cool things about this is it's not one for the 250, but this is leading into something that we're going to be talking about, is that in East Asia, they were very good at metalworking. And one of the reasons for that is not everybody there needed to farm, so they had time to come up with much more advanced techniques of art creation. And one of those is bronze. So, for example, we see here a seated Buddha, which is bronze in Thailand. And in East Asia, this is going to be one of the more popular ways to see the Buddha is done in precious materials, such as bronze or materials covered in gold. In Japan, we'll talk about one of the biggest bronze Buddhas in the world. So what we are seeing here is in this part of the world, they didn't really view Buddha as a god, but he was a human named Shakyamuni. So whenever you hear that term, I want you to know that they are talking about Buddha, especially in this part of the world. So you notice he's shown by himself. He's not shown with bodhisattvas or anything else around him. He's not shown with a halo because he wasn't viewed that way. And he's commonly shown the way he would normally be, very simply dressed, earth-touching mudra, in touch with the earth, and then meditation. So really in this part of the world, the things to realize is the farther we go in East Asia, the more Buddha is going to be shown more commonly portrayed in not just stone, but also in metal. And we know that's him because of the iconography behind it, but definitely a different way of showing the Buddha. So from Thailand, we're also going to see Buddhism spread into Tibet. And if you know anything about Tibet, Tibet is like the Buddhist capital of the world today. The Dalai Lama, who is the head of basically Buddhism for so many people in the world, lives in Tibet. And Tibet is a location of many, many Buddhist monasteries where people will go and kind of seclude themselves and dedicate themselves to understanding the teachings and wisdom of Buddhism. So Buddhism there is where we're actually going to see something really cool created called Thangka paintings, which can be hung on the walls. And what this is kind of like a mandala, which you would be able to look at this during meditation and be able to like really focus on the circular parts of it, because everything about it kind of guides your eye in the circle. So it's really kind of this visual aid in meditation. So like the Tibetan Thangkas are very, very popular. People seem to have those all over the place. So this is just to show you a mandala, which if you ever do adult coloring, you really need to get some of the mandala books because they're everywhere and you'll see them all over the place. And people like it because of the repeating cyclical patterns, and that's actually done on purpose. This is because that repetition and like repetitive breathing, and it calms your breathing, and coloring is actually found to lower your stress rates and your heart rates, and coloring a mandala can actually help do that. But in terms of Buddhist practice, they're very symbolic in terms of the universe, that it's just a pattern that keeps on repeating and just keeps on going, almost limitless. And I've seen some of these done in things like sand. I've seen them tattooed, but they're really supposed to be about a focused meditation and a way to really put your energy in a particular place. And meditation does that. Like, it actually makes you focus on your breathing, lowers your heart rate so that you're very present and you're kind of right here, and it calms that monkey mind of bouncing all over the place. So just kind of interesting, if you ever do adult coloring book, you may come across a mandala like this. So how is Buddhism going to become such a big deal in Tibet? Well, it's actually kind of a really fun story, because during this time, King Gampo, who was the ruler of Tibet, he married two women. All right, so he married, one of them was Nepal, and the other one was from Nepal, and one of them is a princess from Tang, China. And we are going to talk about China later on, but something to know about them is Tang China really promoted Buddhism in a big way. And that's because Buddhism became very popular in China during a time when there was a lot of chaos. And Buddhism was kind of what people relied on, and the monasteries were kind of what people had to lean back on when times were really bad in China. So for the Tang to come in and say get rid of Buddhism would have been a huge mistake. So initially, the Tang Dynasty really pushed Buddhism, and King Gampo actually embraced the idea of Buddhism as well to help instill peace and good values in his people. So he married not only a princess of Nepal, but he also married a Tang princess of China who was also Buddhist. And they both brought a statue of Sakyamuni with them because both of these were Buddhist areas. So he initially built a little tiny little Jokhang temple for the princess of Nepal to put her little Buddha in. And the princess of China was like, I'm a princess of Tang China. My little Buddha deserves a much, much, much bigger place. And in fact, I deserve a much, much bigger statue. All right. Everything about this needs to be bigger because I am from Tang China. So not wanting to upset this princess and obviously the Tang dynasty that she married from, he built this entire Jokhang temple to house her Buddhist statue of Sakyamuni, which is going to be absolutely huge. Now, the story of this statue is actually, so the one that she brought was very, very special because the idea was that the Buddha did not want any, I can't even talk, idols made of himself. He didn't want any likenesses made of himself especially after he had reached enlightenment. He was like, I don't think that's right. It could turn me into an idol. And this is all about not wanting. So he said, you can have a couple made of me. He allowed one from when he was 8 years old and one when he was 12, as he was an Indian prince. All right. So all of these were before he had given up all worldly goods, before he had reached enlightenment. So as a result of this particular Buddha, which you can see here is definitely East Asian because it's gilded, which means it's covered in gold, which is something very, very common during this time to show value and importance. And it's been gilded over several different times, like to make sure the gold stays in very good, shape. So you can see here that this Buddha is covered in jewels and crowns, and the temple that he's in is very much inspired by Tang China. Like it's really not a Tibetan style. It was a wooden kind of building with gold across the top of it, which of course Buddha, after enlightenment, who's all about giving up worldly goods, would never have liked. Like he would have said, no, this is wrong. So just to show you guys what we're talking about here, here's Nepal and there's China above them. So obviously, which princess are you going to make happier? You're going to make the princess with the bigger area happy and give her the bigger Buddha and the bigger temple for her Buddha doll. So this is to show you what we're looking at. It's absolutely huge. And up here at the top, you see the dragons, and dragons in Chinese culture are actually very lucky. They're a good thing to have. They bring good fortune because Chinese dragons spray water. We have this idea of dragons being destructive and breathing fire, but that's actually not true. Dragons in China would spray water, which could be life-giving. So dragons were considered very lucky. So we have here the Tang China dragons on the side, which, by the way, if you ever watch Mulan, Mulan is wrong because Mushu spits fire, and that wouldn't have been accurate anyway. But you can see here, this is Buddha very young, and with all of these things and shrines, like this is a shrine to him, and they're offerings to him, which would have been long before he would have been enlightened, because he wouldn't have accepted these things after he'd reached enlightenment. But here he's just a young boy of 12, so it can be very opulent, and it's considered very, very sacred because this actually, according to legend, may be the actual face of what the Buddha looked like, because that's what they believe. So this is the exterior of Jokhang Temple, and you can see it's very natural. So it's got that Buddhist kind of nature, Zen embracing of nature, but then it's got the gold up at the top. And you can see here around it, like nothing else really looks like Chinese, but that temple definitely does. So again, the idea around why this is so important is because it may, probably not, but it was based on the accurate portrait of the Buddha himself, because it would have been based off how he actually looked. So he does have, he is holding mudras, he does have teaching mudras, but it's not really so much of the same mudras you would see after he had reached enlightenment, because he's like more calling people to witness what he's saying later on and not yet the reaching of enlightenment. And he's dressed up, like this one is always dressed up in very elaborate crowns and dresses and Tibetan jewels and all of these, very fancy things, because this is before he would have reached enlightenment. So we've talked about all of this, all right, of what happens when the belief systems of India leave India. But what happens when outside ideas come into India and mix with those belief systems? So what happens when, for example, Hellenistic Greece under Alexander the Great and his ideas and the art, under him make it all the way into India and mix with those belief systems? So for example, this is what we call a Gandhara Buddha. And the Gandharan region, which I'm going to show you where this is the region where Hellenistic Greece and Alexander the Great's Greece mix with India. So we've got basically Hinduism, Buddhism mixing with what is coming in from the Western world, particularly under Hellenistic Greek and after the death of Alexander the Great. So you can see here that this has definitely got a little bit of a Greek touch to it. So it's more shown, he's in a contrapposto stance, his left knee is bent, he's got that wet look of Phidias, so kind of like that style. He's wearing a full toga and covered. He's got the nimbus behind him, which would be a halo. That was something that came from Rome. And a much more stoic expression, like a little bit more stern, like almost like we would see in the spear bearer. So that Gandharan region that you can see, actually, where's my map of Gandharan? Okay, so this right here. Okay, so like this kind of red spot that you're seeing right here, that's the Gandharan area, right? And this is that area where those two worlds kind of collide, right? So we can see, now I'm backtracking a little bit, so I want you guys to understand and take this in context, because this is a really hard piece to try to figure out where to put it exactly. Like it could go with Rome, but it could go here. So I'm going to put it here and just want you to understand that this doesn't really mix in with Hinduism or Buddhism, but it does show that Hellenistic Greek influence moving east. So hopefully that makes sense. All right. So when we talk about the Alexandrian style, we're talking about Alexandria in Egypt, which was Alexander the Great's capital that he made for himself in Egypt, which basically blends together Greek and Egyptian cultures. All right. So as Alexander moved even farther to the east, moving to conquer Persia and make it all the way to India, that style that he took with him, even if it wasn't the same idealistic, humanistic ideas, those artistic styles from like Alexandria kind of started to move with them. All right. So we can really see this in an area called Petra. All right. And Petra, if you look right here, is located in what is modern day Jordan. All right. And this was the Nabatean kingdom. All right. So, and these guys were involved in trade heavily, like a lot of nomadic people, a lot of Arabic groups who are in here along the trade routes, the spice trade, the Silk Road trade. Now, eventually this will be taken over by the Romans. So it is important to understand that, because this whole area of the world will be taken over by the Romans. But this area shows a much greater influence by Hellenistic Greek than it does Roman. So for a long time, people are like, oh, this area looks the way it does because the Romans conquered this area. But no, a true art historian knows that by looking at Petra, we can see that was the Greeks and Alexander the Great style that influenced Petra, and then further east ran into like India than did the Romans, long before the Romans even showed up. So for example, right here, we have the treasury at Petra. And there's also, I mean, this wasn't just one small area of like a treasury or a tomb. This was an entire Hellenistic style city. And if you look here, we can see that carved into this rock, right? So like this treasury and some of these funerary areas, you can see this circular tholos top right up here. You can see Corinthian columns. The pediment is broken at the top. It doesn't meet all the way up, which was kind of a Hellenistic thing. There's female nude sculptures, which would have been, not A, Rome didn't really do that, and B, that was definitely after Alexander the Great. So we can look at these and see, like if you notice over here on this side in the top left, it's got two parts of a broken pediment and then the circular shrine right there in the center, and then Corinthian columns like carved into this. So we can definitely see that Greek influence moving from Alexander the Great to the east, where it'll eventually run into India and create that Gandharan region where you get India mixed with Alexander's Greece. Now, what's kind of cool is if you ever see the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, they used Petra at the end, whenever they went into the place where the Holy Grail was stored. And this is just a little clip of them going through the canyon, arriving to this, which was very, very secluded within this canyon, probably because it was either a royal treasury or a burial ground.